This is a Queen Bee Radio High School sports presentation.
Welcome to another edition of the Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundup. We got a jam-packed show recapping Week 3 and previewing Week 4 in high school football. Also have a lot of fun stuff on the Shoebox Scoreboard. Going to talk about volleyball, girls golf, cross country, all the recaps from the previous week. We have that coming up for you, as well as our one-on-one with a great one interview with Potosi Cassville coach Mark Siegert. All that coming up. But let's talk about Week 3 in high school football. A very interesting Week 3 in the high school football sports scene. Let's run down some of the scores from last week's games, and starting off with the game that we had Thursday night on 97.7 Country WGLR. Iowa Grant defeating Boscoville in what was a roller coaster game, 44-24. And then on Friday night, we had Lancaster beating Prairie du Chien 28-27. Platteville, Oliver Dodgeville 48-0. Cuba City, Oliver Peck Argyle 42-6. In SWC action, Broadhead Judah defeated Richland Center 41-7. River Valley falls to Wisconsin Dells 27-20. And in the Six Rivers SWAL crossover games, we had Darlington, Oliver Potosi Cassville 41-8. River Ridge shuts out Belleville 24-0. Benton Scales Mount Shalsburg comes away with a win over Fenimore, an 0-2 team defeating a 2-0 team, 36-20, the final score in that one. Mineral Point 31, Southwestern East Dubuque 23. That was a very interesting back and forth matchup. Blackhawk Warren over Parkview Albany 62-6. And then in the Ridge and Valley Conference, 56-0, Hillsboro over Necedah. Highland over Seneca Wazeeka Steuben, 21-0. Ithaca barely escapes Riverdale, 12-8 in a very low-scoring affair. And in 8-player football, North Crawford 70, Williams Bay 0. Belmont gets their first win of the season, 38-20. DeSoto Oliver Menominee Indian 82-0. Oakfield 43-6 over Wanawak Center Weston. And Abundant Life 34, Kickapoo Lafarge 14. Those are the games from Week 3 involving our area teams and conferences. And let's start off with the two wild games that we had in Boscoville and Prairie du Chien. And sorry, not sorry for having the two most entertaining games on our airways last week. I'm not going to fully apologize for having that. But for the game on Thursday night, a very roller coaster game, especially in that second quarter where it felt like Boscoville was going to be falling out of the game. They had a player that was injured at the beginning part of the second quarter that delayed the game about 10, 15 minutes or so. And all of a sudden, Iowa Grant goes up 30-6 about midway through the quarter. And then Boscoville battles their way back to make it 38-18 at the half. And then they score again to start the third quarter, make it 30-24. And then all of a sudden, Boscoville gets in the end zone, but a penalty negates the score, pushes them back, and Boscoville wasn't able to punch it in the end zone again. Iowa Grant comes back and comes away with a 44-24 win over the Bulldogs. And I don't know, necessarily what to make of the Ridge and Valley quite yet, just because, again, weeks 1 and 2 were not in favor of the Ridge and Valley by any stretch. But I will say this, for both Iowa Grant and Boscoville, I don't know how good they are, but they sure are fun to watch. Both quarterbacks were really poised in the pocket. They did not, get phased, with any pressure that was coming down on them. Whitaker for Boscoville, more of the bruiser type quarterback, willing to take on contact, willing to drop his shoulder to gain some extra yardage. And Kyle Steffel of Iowa Grant, showing his basketball agility that he's shown playing for Iowa Grant, spinning off defenders and showing that elusiveness. And maybe Scott, I'll kind of ask you this, because with the scores that have come through this week, you kind of think through 2 weeks, you kind of get a feel for, what teams are, what their strengths are, what they might be heading, towards the season. And then you get to week 3 and then, a complete pivot happens where it's like, whoa, what, why is this score happening? Or this was not the outcome that we were expecting. Now that we are 3 weeks in, do you kind of feel that what your team is going to be like and kind of know what your opponent's strengths and weaknesses are? Or is that still, a couple games down the line, maybe?
And no, I think by week 3, you're going to find out your strengths and you're going to tend to build around those strengths. And now you got 2 games on your opponent instead of a 1 tape. It gives you a little bit more to learn from and find out their weaknesses. But you're also going to find out it's kind of like the milk and cream where they separate. You're going to start seeing the better teams separate themselves from the lesser teams. And, these next couple of weeks, you're going to see more and more of that.
I tend to think that also that, and Scott and I were talking a little bit about this during the game last week. It's kind of a demonstration of how things have really changed in high school football over the last maybe 30 plus years, because the teams that were good 30 years ago were the teams that had the best running backs. But now you look at a game like yours on Thursday. By the way, what time do you get home after that?
Yeah, that was an 11:30 walk in the house and lock the door time frame.
Yeah,
it was a little later than I would have liked, and yeah, my vocal cords were not in the best shape afterwards. But yes,
but it's you're talking about 2 teams that are really dominated by their quarterbacks, not just throwing the ball, but running it also. That was a relatively rare thing, 30, 35 years ago, and now it feels as though the teams that have the best quarterback play are the ones that are able to, at least stay in the game. I have to think also that because of how even the Ridge and Valley is, and because of the fact there is no dominant team, and I guess after the first few weeks, really no clear favorite at this point, that may not be the only kind of wild Ridge and Valley game that we see this season, just because of there's no team there that looks like they're going to go run away with Ridge and Valley, because if that were the case, they would have done better in the non-conference season. And, well, you said what they did in the non-conference season. So that might not even be the wildest game of the year, possibly, depending on how things work out.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, too, is looking at, the scores from this week, just the fact that Ithaca barely escaped Riverdale in a low-scoring affair. 12-8 was the final in that one. Didn't see the full stats or how that game fully played out. But when you look at, those, types of scores, it does, seem to indicate that the Ridge and Valley's wide open. It's just someone just has to step up and be willing to take it. And it just seems like whichever team gets it together the quickest is going to be the favorite the rest of the way.
And I would tend to think also that probably whoever ends up as a champion isn't going to be undefeated for that, because they will, again, nobody stood out at this point. There have been a couple of teams that are perhaps were supposed to do better than they have to this point. And so, maybe the preseason predictions weren't quite right, and maybe it's just a wide open conference this year.
Yep, that certainly seems to be the case. And now we'll talk about the Lancaster Prairie du Chien game that I had on Friday night with Tom Nisus. And, the first half of that game, it did feel like it was kind of a running clock, because it was just both teams, I formation up the middle. No one ran out of bounds. There may have been a total combined of 7 pass plays, in the game, for the duration of it. Both teams really only had 2 possessions in the first half, and the extra point that Prairie du Chien converted was the difference. 13-12 heading into the second half. And then it felt like Prairie was going to get the momentum. They go back-to-back possessions with touchdowns. And, in between those 2 possessions, Lancaster goes 3 and out. And with, I'd say, 13 minutes and 3 seconds left in the game, Prairie had the momentum. And then all of a sudden, Lancaster they go on a lengthy drive. They get their first 2-point conversion of the season to make it a 1-score game, and they get the one defensive stat that they needed, which leads to a punt that gets ricocheted out of bounds. Lancaster takes over at Prairie's 22-yard line, and Peyton Alvarado punches it in and then gets the 2-point conversion, gives Lancaster the lead, and the Lancaster defense comes up strong. It was a very gritty, very physical football game, as you would imagine, between the two rivals in the SWC. But Lancaster, a very emotional win, and you would think Prairie du Chien had every reason to be the number 2 ranked team in Division 5 heading into it, coming off those big wins against Aquinas and Darlington. But Steve, you kind of mentioned this before we came on, that it's one thing to win games like that and to have that emotional high, but you are also kind of playing with fire a bit, where it can backfire on you to a degree if you keep letting teams stay in it. And I don't want to say that Prairie du Chien necessarily took their foot off the gas, but they gave Lancaster opportunities to take the game away from them, and they did.
All right. Well, and let's remember that this is a team that beat Lacrosse Aquinas on a touchdown with like 40 seconds left,
right,
to start the season, and they got the lead on Darlington, but had to hang on and turn back a 2-point attempt that would have tied the game right at the end. So yeah, sometimes you play with fire and you get burned. And I have to think Prairie is probably kicking itself for having really had Lancaster on the ropes and letting them off. Because you would think that a team that runs as much as Lancaster does, and a new quarterback, that you get them down by a couple of scores, and you think that ought to be enough. But to Lancaster's credit, they didn't all of a sudden try to do stuff they were not capable of doing. I think it was Mike Emmendorfer, longtime UW Platteville coach, who said that big comebacks start with defense, and they got a touchdown obviously to get back within the score, but they don't win that game if they don't get the stop and get the ball back. So even though they gave up, I'm sure, more points than Lancaster wanted to give up, you can really credit the defense. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been in the position to come back to win the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Scott, I want to ask you about this too, because there were a lot of penalties in that game as well. I don't have the exact penalty stats from that game, but I usually say this in weeks 1 and 2 that some penalties are a bit more forgivable than others. Things like holding and stuff like that, where players are they're giving their best effort. It's just maybe wrong place, wrong time, that type of thing. But the penalties that are more pre-snap penalties, or just unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, things like that, by week 3, shouldn't those things be cleaned up a little bit more? Or is that something that you have to continuously preach to teams throughout the season? Or is there kind of a certain point where it's like it's understood this is what we're expecting pre-snap and your conduct during the game?
Well, first, when you think about the penalties, Lancaster had a problem with this last year, and it hurt them in some drives and some games. And they started out this year, I saw them the first game, and they had penalties that killed their drives. It's acceptable for some penalties. I mean, sometimes kids try too hard and get caught. But your personal fouls and things like that, you got to keep your emotions checked in. I didn't see the game with Lancaster and Prairie du Chien, but Prairie is coming off a big win against Darlington. They've had a big win against Aquinas. It's going to come where they might find a letdown, and Lancaster isn't a bad team, and they found a way to win it just by keeping their cool and keeping their heads in the game. So yeah, some penalties need to be cleaned up. Some penalties are going to occur just because of kids trying too hard.
Mm-hmm. Yep, agreed. All right, let's talk about the other two games that we had on Queen Bee Radio last week. Scott, you and Steve had Platteville at Dodgeville, and Platteville coming away with the 48-0 win. I don't think that we are necessarily surprised that Platteville won the game. We've been talking about Platteville over the last couple of weeks at, how good and maybe how overlooked Platteville, might be, in the SWC, but shutting out, any team, especially in the SWC is, no small feat by any stretch. Scoreboard indicates that Platteville looked impressive. How'd they look from your perspective?
Well, the thing that Platteville did was to take advantage of everything that went wrong for Dodgeville, basically, because they got a blocked punt. I think they've had now 3 blocked punts in 2 weeks. They got an interception, led to a score, a fumble of a kickoff, that led to a score, and they also topped it off with an interception for a pick 6. It was one of those cases where Dodgeville needed to play a whole lot better than that, and whenever something didn't go right, basically, Platteville took full advantage of them. As far as their quarterback play, TJ Pink basically picked up where he left off a week ago. He's now thrown in the last 2 weeks 8 touchdown passes and just 1 interception that was essentially, as Josh knows, just a long punt. And the thing about it is that unlike a lot of teams that throw the ball, they're really spreading it around. I think they had touchdowns to 4 different receivers. They had pass completions to 6 different receivers. They had 3 different running backs running the ball. There's no one guy on this offense that you can key on Platteville. And this is, one reason that you can tell that they're a lot better than they were last year is that they are that deep a team. And they have, starting this week, they will have fewer guys who will be starting both ways. And, that's obviously a plus for any team because people will get banged up over the course of the season. But if you're able to bring in guys, rotate them, and not have to rely on the same guys on both sides of the ball. Plus, on special teams, you have a chance to do something with your season.
Yeah, platooning does give a team an edge if you're playing a team that's got kids playing both ways and special teams. Yeah, Platteville played pretty much the first half on Dodgeville's side, and like I told Steve, I said, Dodgeville can't give up the big plays, and they have to make the big plays. And unfortunately, Dodgeville gave up the big plays and didn't make any big plays. They showed the youth, or I should say the youth showed a lot on Friday night against a team that's got a little bit more veterans on.
Yeah, we had kind of a difficulty coming up with the last MAC drive of the game because there weren't very many long drives of the game. Longest drive of the game was 50 yards. That was it. And as far as those big plays, Platteville got the deflected punt, got the ball at the Dodgeville 36, dial up a touchdown right away. And then they got another one right after that. Now you're looking up and you're not even halfway through the fourth quarter. Already Dodgeville's down 14-0. And it all kind of snowballed from there, I thought, for the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Yep, and then the other game that we had on Queen Bee Radio last week, Cuba City at Peck Argyle. Cuba City winning 42-6. Josh, you witnessed that in person, and sounds like Cuba City is without Cale Dinar with a broken foot, which was, he went off on Benton Scales Mount Shalsburg in week 1, scoring those 4 touchdowns. But seems like Cuba City got back on the right track after falling to Lancaster the week before. And I caught a little bit of the pregame that you and Shark had where, Peck Argyle, the record might not be what it seems, going in 0-2. They are a very pass heavy team, but what did you see in the Cuba City Peck Argyle game last week?
Oh, it's kind of a good segue talking about the Platteville game. I mean, Cuba City has a big team, numbers wise and physically wise. Even with Cale Dinar out, Cuba City had the ball the entire second quarter in Puck territory and ran out of the I form several times. In their backfield, they had the backup running back, who is now the starter, Andy Leffelholz, and Wyatt Lisk, both in the backfield, who are both 6'1", 210. And then you got 220 across up front, and Puck Argyle had 18 kids out. And they did have good news, 6 more kids that are be joining the team, but they have to get their practices in. And then Cuba City tops it off with 2 pick sixes on back-to-back plays to start the second half. And yeah, it was kind of all over from there, and Cuba City just leaned on them with their numbers. They're really set up as if it isn't enough evidence having somebody like Leffelholz step up. This is a team that can be coached to long-term success with their size and their numbers.
All right, that's the recap with Cuba City and Peck Argyle. Let's talk about some of the Swall Six Rivers crossover games. The ones that really jump out to me. I think the most obvious one is Darlington routing Potosi Cassville, 41-8, the final score. Josh, we were talking about this, I believe, last week, where Darlington had struggled, in the first half of each of their first 2 games, but it seems like whatever they had to correct, they made those corrections and jumped out to a big lead on Potosi Cassville early on. And, maybe a bit of maybe just an unfortunate thing for Potosi Cassville to have to catch Darlington after a loss. I think there was, maybe an attitude adjustment, with that. But I honestly thought that, that was going to be a physical defensive matchup. But seems like Darlington came through and busted through to a blowout win.
Absolutely. And the Darlington Platteville game that Steve and I covered, we could kind of see it from the Darlington offense. If they could kind of figure out some of their small mistakes, like the QB center exchange and kind of getting their footwork right in the backfield, they're a force to be reckoned with. I just didn't expect it to be that crazy of a score. That was very impressive win from Darlington.
And, if you're Potosi Cassville, you have to kind of wonder, what in the world did we do to deserve this kind of crossover schedule? Because, you get Darlington, who's still one of the best teams in the area, independent of losing a game. And then next week, they get Cuba City, which is pretty good also. And I'm pretty sure that nobody else has the kind of crossover schedule in the Six Rivers that Potosi Cassville has. And there's real implications to this, not for the Six Rivers title, because, of course, they only count the games against Six Rivers opponents. But that game Friday and this game coming up Friday for the Chieftains does count toward playoff eligibility and toward where you end up getting seated if you make the playoffs. And so there's sort of actually, I know we're not talking about next week yet, but they're sort of behind the 8 ball now, because this game against Cuba City isn't going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination, and they still have not played River Ridge or Black Hawk Warren yet. So
right.
That is, I'm not sure that a strength of schedule thing is supposed to be part of a conference schedule, but thanks to the crossover, that's what they have. And they've got the toughest one of all of them, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I know they got blown out, but if they can keep the scores close, even when they do the seeding, by being beat by a team that's maybe in a different division you are, it does kind of help the ranking a little bit. It's kind of like basketball.
Yeah, although we don't fully know how each criteria part is weighted, there are certainly quality losses that that factor into it. It's just how significant are those compared to the other things that that get weighted into how the seeding is sorted out. One of the 2 other games that we'll talk about, Josh, Mineral Point beating Southwestern East Dubuque. I got the updates during the game in Prairie du Chien, and saw Mineral Point was up, I think, 24-9 or something along those lines. And I was like, oh, Mineral Point found some offense. And then the next update I got was, I think, 24-23. Southwestern East Dubuque getting back into it. And I was like, oh, well, Southwestern East Dubuque found their offense. and then Mineral Point able to pull it away. But for a Mineral Point team that certainly struggled in the first 2 games of the season, they certainly seem to have get something to have gone right against the Warcats last week.
Yeah, and just kind of a wild game back and forth. And I don't know if it was another one of those where Mineral Point kind of ran into a buzzsaw against Platteville, because Platteville offense just matched up perfectly against the Mineral Point defense, where their defensive backs struggled a little bit. And playing against a team like Southwestern East Dubuque, who likes to run the ball a little bit more, they obviously matched up quite a bit better.
Here's an interesting fact, by the way, about the SWAL this year. You realize after 3 weeks, there are no undefeated teams anymore in the SWAL.
Right.
And that's the case in the Ridge and Valley. That was the case after the first week. But, usually that's not often the case. Darlington obviously is dominated, and other teams have done quite well. But all of a sudden, here you look, and there's nobody with a 0 on the loss column. And the other question I think that's interesting is, who is the second best team in the SWAL? I think, at this point, you got to say Darlington's the best team in the SWAL, but that question of who's the second best team is going to be an interesting one to get answered this year.
Yeah, certainly. And like you just mentioned, Steve, Fenimore losing their first game of the season to Benton Scales Mount Shalsburg. And why that game to me just seems very strange is that when you look at how Benton Scales Mount Shalsburg has played in the first 2 weeks, at Cuba City, they lose 39-14, and then they lose at Westby 68-22. So they were not necessarily full competitive games, and granted, they were playing against bigger programs as far as numbers. Cuba City, I think, has somewhere around 70 kids out for football this year, and I'm sure Westby has a pretty loaded roster in their own right. But when I look at that final score against Fenimore, 36-20, almost doubling up the Golden Eagles, and undefeated Golden Eagles team heading into it, a very odd score to see, an 0-2 team defeating a 2-0 team in a crossover matchup. And that kind of ties into what I was asking you, Scott, earlier. Like, when you get to that third week, do you kind of know who you are, and does that make it easier for teams to exploit some of the weaknesses that you have? And it seems like that's what Benton Scales Mount Shalsburg did against Fenimore.
Yeah, and the other thing you don't know, not being at the game, has Benton gotten some kids out that may not have played in the first game or two, or has Fenimore lost because of injuries? Without being at the game and watching those teams, sometimes scores are a little crazy, but there might be an underlying cause for some of those too.
Yeah, there's sometimes injuries or something like that happens that can impact that. But yeah, definitely, one of the more odd scores to see come through this last week. Let's move into the Ridge and Valley. Highland shutting out Seneca Wazeeka Steuben. 21-0 was the final. And again, for the third straight week, the reigning Ridge and Valley Conference champion has been shut out. And granted, I'm sure it's due to them being a young team and just trying to get their footing on there. But Highland now tied for first in the Ridge and Valley Conference, and then Ithaca escaping Riverdale. We talked about this a little bit earlier, where again, I think Ithaca was kind of the consensus pick to win the Ridge and Valley, but again, not fully seeing how the game played out. Ithaca did have, a very tough non-conference schedule. I know Potosi Cassville was one of their first games, and I believe Cashton was the other. Again, a very good Cashton team. But Steve, you kind of alluded to this too in the football preview show that Riverdale brings back a lot of experience, and maybe Riverdale's one of those teams that has something to say in this Ridge and Valley the rest of the way.
That's true, and you could look at it as Riverdale has not been successful for a number of years, and not having seen how the game went, did they fail to close out? Ithaca's been a very good program out of that conference for a number of years. Sometimes teams just are able to, because they've done it before, they don't get rattled when they're down late, and they don't get rattled when the score is close. And so maybe that's what happened with Ithaca. But as I said, it just doesn't feel like there's any team that's going to stand out of the Ragin Valley. And the teams that lost obviously are a little handicapped after just 1 week, but I still think that the Ragin Valley is just a wide open conference because the teams are pretty even, probably from top to, or well, maybe middled up to the top anyway.
Definitely. And closing out the recap, the Belmont Braves got their first win of the season against Elkhart Lake. We forgot to talk about them after their season opening loss against Oneida Nation. They lost 20-12 in week 1 to Oneida Nation, but they got things on the right track against Elkhart Lake on Friday, 38-20, the final score. And looking at the scoring line of that one, seems like Belmont pretty much led from start to finish, holding Elkhart Lake scoreless in the second and third quarters. So Belmont getting things on the right track after stumbling out of the gate. But yeah, the Braves, initially when I saw the score of the first game, I was, kind of curious has the offense kind of fallen back, but looking at how things have looked statistically in their last game, looks like Gavin Opitz, 5 of 8, 30 yards, 1 touchdown, and they had 200-yard rushers. Braden Stymies, 15 attempts for 101 yards, and then Chance Ryder, 14 carries for 126 yards. So seems like the rushing attack for Belmont is heading on the right track, and probably something that they're going to be building on as they move towards the rest of the 8-player football season.
I agree.
Yeah,
It's one of those where, they graduated a lot of good kids last year, and they're trying to find out where their starters are and who they're going to be that first game. And first game jitters might have cost them. In some cases, it might be a good loss. I remember the year we went to state, we lost to Pecatonica the first game of the year, 14-7, and it just made us more focused, and we pulled off the next 12 wins until we got to state.
Yeah, sometimes a season opening loss ends up being more of a blessing in disguise, because, maybe you're coming in, you have some, high expectations, but being, grounded down to reality can, kind of be that, check that, your team needs to, clean up some things and, get the mind right heading in the rest of the way. And, maybe that's, the case for Belmont again. Maybe that's a repeat, because that's exactly what happened to them last season. Started off the season with a loss, and then they got all the way to the state championship game. So maybe that could be the case for the Belmont Braves. Obviously a lot to be decided the rest of the way, but Belmont getting back on the right track in their second game of the season. Now it's hard to believe, but a third of the season's already done. And now that each 11-player team has 3 games under their belt, I'll ask you guys, have we learned anything after 3 weeks of the season? Is there anything that significantly stands out to you about what we were thinking, might happen? Has something changed your mind through 3 weeks? Anything that significantly stands out to any of you guys?
Well, the first thing I'll talk about the SWC first is that everybody thought at the start of the year it was going to be Broadhead Judah or Prairie du Chien. that still could be the case. Their matchup toward the end of the season is going to be a huge game, obviously. But Lancaster threw a giant monkey wrench into the works by beating Prairie du Chien on Friday. The other thing is that I think Platteville was probably underestimated by some people. I can tell you that the team knows that WisSports.net picked them for 5th in the SWC, and I'm positive that did not escape notice. And they lost to Darlington, which is still one of the best teams in the area. They have not given up any points since they played Darlington. So I'm sure Scott can attest to this. Teams, you never know going into a season for sure what you're going to have. You think you do, but that first game is really important just to figure out what works and what doesn't. And then, you end up hopefully with a lot of improvement from week 1 to week 2. And, Platteville, at least at this point, and Lancaster are obviously going to have a big impact on the SWC race, maybe more so than people thought was going to be the case.
I agree with that. I mean, I've seen Lancaster play now and Platteville play, and they're not bad teams. If Lancaster quits making those penalties and mistakes, they're going to be tough to beat. And after watching Platteville, they're big. They got size, they got speed, and that quarterback sure can throw the ball.
As far as the SWAL is concerned, as I said before, funny that 3 weeks in, nobody's undefeated. And Darlington still has to be the odds-on favorite to win the conference until somebody knocks them off in the conference season, if that's the case. I still think it's an interesting question. Who's the second best team in the SWAL? Obviously, predictions of Mineral Point's demise after their 0-2 start have proven to not entirely be correct. Fenimore got off to a 2-0 start. Now they're 0-1 in the conference. So you just look at it, it's like, hard to tell. Who that second best team perhaps in the SWAL is going to end up being.
And it's just been, one of those wild seasons where people, if you want to look at like mutual opponents and mutual results, you can't tell anything. I mean, it seems like every week there's one team knocking somebody else off, and it makes me really excited for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, this kind of ties into what Steve was saying, is that, as far as how the SWAL is going to play out, none of the SWAL teams have played each other yet. And there's another, crossover week coming up this week before those games do start taking place, where the SWAL teams do start playing each other. And I think the first true tell in figuring out that picture is going to be not this Friday, but the following Friday, when Fenimore and Mineral Point go head to head. And I think we'll kind of get a tell to see, was that 2-0 start for Fenimore for real, or did the 0-2 start for Mineral Point, was that for real? And I think we'll kind of get a better tell for that. And then, the other thing, that I've learned is that the defenses as a whole have just been, solid, through 3 weeks. Granted, we've had, some more, higher scoring games, more recently as some of the conference teams that have known each other started going head to head. But, a number of teams, being shut out. Some of the surprising, teams, just the fact that there is a Seneca Wazeeka Steuben team that hasn't scored through 3 weeks. Belleville only scoring 6 points all season long. They were shut out against River Ridge last week. Defense is a premium, and the teams that have it certainly have the best chance, to be in contention in their conferences. But like I always say, the more I learn, the less I know. So that will that will wrap up the week 3 recap. We have more coming up on the high school sports roundup, the Shoebox Scoreboard, our one-on-one interview with Mark Siegert presented by People's State Bank. But later on, I'll have Steve, Scott, and Josh with me. We'll go through the week 4 preview. More on the high school sports roundup after this on YouTube and SoundCloud.
Grow your business by enhancing your digital marketing efforts with Queen Bee Radio and Phase 3 Digital. We provide customized solutions based on your business's unique needs, including targeted advertising, website development, and search engine optimization. Contact us at 608-349-2000 or visit p3da.com/Platteville to learn more.
Let's check in on the Shoebox Scoreboard presented by the Shoebox in Black Earth, the largest independent shoe store in the Midwest. In high school volleyball heading into this week, Cuba City, Mineral Point, and Darlington came in tied for first place in the Southwest Wisconsin Activities League. Richland Center and River Valley were tied for first in the SWC, and Shullsburg and River Ridge were tied with 2-0 conference records in the Six Rivers West. Cuba City got a key conference win against Darlington on Tuesday night, defeating the Redbirds 3-0. Mineral Point also kept pace with a 3-0 win over Iowa Grant, and Southwestern got their first conference win of the season, beating Riverdale 3-0. After a slow start to their season, River Ridge has won 3 straight matches in Six Rivers West play, losing only 1 set in their matches against Cassville, Benton, and Potosi. The Timberwolves will have some tough competition in the next week, though, as they take on rivals Highland and Shullsburg. The match against Shullsburg will be the feature matchup on Tuesday night in our Tuesday night volleyball matchup on 97.7 Country WGLR. In the SWC, Richland Center and River Valley started conference play in the win column. River Valley, one of last year's co-champions in the SWC, will have matches at home against Prairie du Chien and at Lancaster next week, while Dodgeville, the other co-champion from last year, will host Richland Center and travel to Prairie du Chien next week. In cross-country action over the weekend, Darlington hosted their cross-country invitational on Saturday. In the boys' 5,000-meter race, the Fenimore Golden Eagles had the top team score with 45 points, edging out Dodge Point by just 7 points. Belleville's Carter Sholey was the top overall finisher with a time of 17:03. Lane Ard of Dodge Point finished in second place with a time of 17:17, and Iowa Grant's Brett Connolly finished in third with a time of 17:44. In the girls' race, Dodge Point won the meet with a team score of 45 points. Darlington and Lancaster finished in second and third respectively with 62 and 73 points. Abigail Sadler of Mount Horeb won the race with a time of 18:51. Ellie and Annie Robinson of Dodge Point rounded out the top 3 with times of 19:10 and 19:39 respectively. In girls golf, Mount Horeb hosted a triangular with Lancaster and Darlington. The number 5 ranked Flying Arrows won the meet with a team score of 185, defeating the hosts by 11 strokes. Brianna Kirsch was the top individual golfer, shooting a 38 on the day. Ella Fager of Mount Horeb finished in second place, 2 strokes behind Kirsch. Lancaster's Linnell Miller rounded out the top 3, shooting a 45. In boys soccer, the Platteville-Lancaster Co-op edged out River Valley 1-0, and the tri-up of Prairie du Chien, River Ridge, and Seneca fell to Richland Center 7-2. Dodge Point lost both matches they competed in last week, first to Edgerton 5-0, and then to Lodi 4-1. Those are the scores on our Shoebox Scoreboard, presented by the Shoebox in Black Earth, the largest independent shoe store in the Midwest. This one-on-one with the Great One interview is presented by People's State Bank.
Looking for a checking account with no monthly requirements or service charge? People's State Bank's People's Checking Account is just what you're looking for. This account includes free debit card, online and mobile banking, bill pay, and much more at no cost to you. You heard that right. No cost to you. We're your local community bank ready to serve you. People's State Bank. Member FDIC.
Welcome back to the Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundup. It's time for us to go one-on-one with the Great One, presented by People's State Bank. And our guest has many titles within the Potosi School District, including the head coach of the Potosi Cassville Chieftains football and softball teams. He's also a Phi Ed teacher and the athletic director for Potosi High School. We're now joined by Mark Siegert. Mark, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Doing great, Tyler. Thank you for having me.
Yep, absolutely. Well, get into your coaching journey and the accomplishments of your teams in a little bit. But with the school year now officially underway, and from an athletic director standpoint, what are some of the tasks that you have leading up to the start of each school year? And what are the first few weeks of the school year like for you in that particular role?
Well, I try to do, I try to get a lot of stuff done in the off season so that fall can be as smooth as possible, because I know my time is going to be really limited with coaching football and getting stuff off the ground with the football team. So for the most part, a lot of the AD work has already been done throughout the spring and the summer, and so that the fall can go as smoothly as possible. So I try to do a lot of work on the front end of that so that there's not as much time that I have to commit to AD. I have to admit that I'm not the greatest AD in the fall, because I'm trying to get our football team ready, and I also teach, and I also, there's a lot of other stuff. But we try to get this AD thing on autopilot in the fall, so that I've learned to be super organized and make sure we cover every base possible, so that there's no surprises in the fall for sure. And then after the fall season, then it's you're basically staying a year ahead of time and getting stuff done. And quite honestly, I say this a lot, that an AD is only noticed when something goes wrong. So if somebody doesn't show up, there's teams that go in the wrong spot, or there's an official that doesn't show up, or something isn't open, and so it's I enjoy it, but it takes a lot of organization, lots of time, but it's well worth it for the kids. So.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that I think a lot of people don't realize that happens, and the ADs do an outstanding job. All the ADs in our area do an outstanding job with all those responsibilities that they have. Now let's talk about your coaching journey. You've been coaching in Potosi for quite a few years now. Where did the interest in coaching come from, and what's kept you going in those coaching roles for all these years?
Well, I started my coaching career way back when at St. Mary's, and St. Mary's of Platteville, as a basketball coach. Didn't know anything. I give them a lot of credit for letting me be a volunteer coach for their 5th and 6th grade basketball team. And my brothers happened to be on it. And so before that, I just enjoyed, sports in general, and being able to help my little brothers, and it was just a lot of fun. And that's kind of what got me going, because I'm quite a bit older than most of my other siblings. We have almost like 3 families. There's me and my sister, we're pretty close to age, and then there's a 6-7 year gap, and then there's another 5-6 year gap, and then there's another gap. So I'm the oldest of 7, and it was we were always doing something athletic, playing baseball. I was basically running little mini practices for these little guys. So that's where I kind of got started. And then Patty Christ, actually at St. Mary's, I remember going into her office, asking her if I could volunteer to be a 5th, 6th grade basketball coach, even though I had no idea what I was doing. So it started way back then in the early 90s. And then I got a job up north by Green Bay, spent a year up there, and then I went to Benton. And then I've been here ever since. So this is my 30th year of being paid to do this, 25th year as a head coach. But it's been an awesome journey, and it's been awesome to be a part of these kids' lives and make all the connections that I do, both with the kids and the coaches that I have been able to coach with. Those are just awesome things.
Yeah, are there any other, coaches within the coaching community that have given you support or have given you advice to keep you in those coaching roles?
Oh my, geez, there's too many to count. I mean, there's so many people that I owe this to. I was thinking about this when you told me about this interview. I was thinking about, man, who would I thank? And there's this, it's just an amazing list of people, people that don't even know they had an impact on me. Made an impact. And if I think back and I think if one of those people don't make an impact like I did, then I don't know if I'm sitting here in this interview with you. I have, I was a farm kid, and I didn't have much athletic stuff going on besides the backyard with my brothers. And I still remember the time when I had no organized athletics up until my freshman year of football. When our neighbor came up to me, I think he was a sophomore at the time, and he said, "You're going to play football." We had just moved from Dubuque up to the farm in Platteville, And he, he just said, "You're coming out." And I go, "Really? All right, I guess I'll try it." And if he doesn't do that, I don't know if I'm playing. And then I had a great experience as a freshman. And then it just keeps on, it just keeps on growing from there. So I can't name anybody because there's so many people throughout my childhood to my early playing days, to the coaches that I had in college. Had one guy not came into school in Belmont High School and said, "Hey, do you want to play football?" It was like March or April. I don't know if I would have went to college. I don't know if I would have went to college, and that would have not. I would have been fine, probably been on the farm. But anyway, he asked me if I wanted to play football. I said, "You bet." I thought I had played the last game. But anyway, so there's so many guys, and then I go on to coach with some great men, and it's been an awesome experience. I've learned from guys, Hall of Fame coaches everywhere, and a lot of these Hall of Fame coaches I learned just because I was trying to beat them, and I went miserably on my first few years. I mean, I stepped in that first all conference meeting with I think 5 or 6 future Hall of Fame coaches, with like Jerry Usgard and Bob Knight, Scott Machi, and my goodness, there was Dennis Murphy in that room. It was for a first year coach, it was a pretty intimidating environment, and I was well in over my head. But I learned so much from all those guys, just trying to beat them and how they went about their business, and then it just keeps on going. I mean, through the assistants that I've had and been lucky enough to have throughout the years, I've been very blessed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, imagine being a fly on the wall with all those coaches in the same room at once, just talking football. There's got to be so much information and stuff like that that you can pick up on and advice to get your coaching career started. There's definitely a lot in there, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, it's been quite a ride. I mean, it's been awesome. So I can't believe I'm in the other end of that, where I'm the older guy now, and all those guys have been retired now for a little bit. So it's weird that it's come kind of full circle with me.
Yep, absolutely. And like you said, you've had, a very accomplished coaching career with all the conference titles that you've won. You've coached a number of all conference players, took Potosi to the state championship game in 2012. Are there any particular achievements or accomplishments that you might hold near and dear to you that maybe other people aren't necessarily aware of, or things that maybe you just kind of hold more on a more personal level?
Well, it's just that the longer I do this, the more I appreciate the kids that are part of this program and the time and commitment that they put into this. As we're doing this interview, I'm watching all these kids coming in, and it's pretty cool. I mean, these kids don't get paid to do this, and they put in so much time in the weight room in the off season and practices, and then for all those kids that just took a leap of faith back when I was really young and cutting my teeth, we had some really good athletes back in my first few days of coaching, but I don't know if I knew what I was doing to actually help them out. So I appreciate all those guys that took that leap of faith and didn't just give up. And there's a ton of experiences that I have that are so memorable. I can't name any, just one. And it's just, I was lucky enough to coach my own son. Of course, we took that one team to state. We've done so much with so many people, with so many coaches. To name just one or two would be unfair to have those other guys that have made this what it is, because it's certainly not just because of me. And a lot of people had a lot of patience with me, and they've stuck with the program and done the things that they're not easy to do in today's day and age. I couldn't be more proud to be where I'm at and coach where I'm at. So to name a couple, it'd be really tough for me.
Yeah, I believe that. And Potosi co-ops with Cassville in many sports, including 2 that you coach. I think it certainly worked out well, especially on the football side of things. But the obvious things like transportation and scheduling and things like that need to be sorted out are some of the obstacles that come with that. But what do you think is kind of the key to making co-op programs successful, especially around this area?
Well, I mean, we are on the, we're a good 20 miles away almost. So it's 18 miles away. So it's a bit on the pain in the butt side in terms of the logistics of it. It's a little farther than a lot of co-ops. So, to make that work isn't really easy sometimes logistically, but I'm telling you, the administration from both schools have been so supportive. The kids have been incredible. If you want the real answer why these things work, it is the kids who make this work, and they get it and they understand how this is all going to happen. I remember taking that first co-op team, and that was really nerve-wracking because that was essentially the end of Potosi football. It was the end of Cassville football. You kind of have to put the an ending on both of those two programs and start a brand new program. So we've, like you said at the beginning, we were the PC Potosi Cassville Chieftains. I haven't used the word chieftain since 2016. That was our last time of being a chieftain, really, because we have been, the Potosi Cassville football team since then, and we've tried to made it our own identity. I give a lot of credit to Chad Infield, who helped this process because he's been the AD there for as long as we've been co-opted, and without him and his support, I don't know how this goes, without that, so he's been super helpful, and he is right in step with everything that we do here. So, and we pretty much see eye to eye in terms of what we want our kids to experience through athletics. And I don't know, it's been a great experience, and keeping communication lines open and having people that are committed to accepting some change have been important too. And so our school administration, and of course our communities too, they've accepted this. And even though there were some naysayers at the beginning, there wasn't not everybody thought this was going to work, but the kids figured it out, and that's really important.
Yeah, it's awesome to see the communities come together and support that. That's not an easy task by any stretch. You see a number of these, co-ops starting to happen just to have, sports available at these schools. And yeah, it's good that, these communities, especially the two as tight knit as Potosi and Cassville, to come together. It's really awesome to see, and it's obviously worked out really well over the last number of years. The final question that we have for you, when you're not coaching in Potosi, if we're, when we're there broadcasting games, we can usually run into you, at some point during that evening. How much free time do you get during the year? And then do you have any hobbies or anything that you do outside of coaching that's, helps you, decompress, or things that you just kind of do for fun outside of coaching and those, athletic director roles?
Well, as if I were to give any, I've been doing this a long time. I think, it's been 30 years of coaching and teaching and 25 years of head coach. And I think you need to make sure that your work balance there is not going to be an equal balance, but there has to be time where you spend with your family. So I try to make it as family friendly as I can. And weekends are really precious to me. I really try to avoid a lot of Saturday commitments and Sunday commitments because, athletics could eat up the whole 7 days a week, and that's just not, in my opinion, high school athletics. So I enjoy spending a lot of time with my family whenever I can. That's super important to me. I like doing woodworking or yard work, or I like working, just where you can put on a headset or get behind a tractor and just kind of do some stuff that just kind of be out by yourself too sometimes too, which is important. But I don't know. I just being a part of we have 5 kids, Amy and I, and that's to spend time with those kids and is so important. And we try to make it so that football is kind of a family thing. So it'll be a little bit different next year, because we won't have any. It'll just be me on the sideline, and Amy may be selling clothes. Hopefully, if I can talk her into doing some of that, because she does a lot of work in the background. But all the kids will be off in college now, and so it'll add a different element to this journey. But making sure that you have time for your family is really important to the longevity of this. If you don't, you can get burned out really fast. And make sure that you keep high school athletics high school. You don't need to make it into a college deal here. Some folks, especially younger coaches, want to do stuff 7 days a week. And it's just, I don't know. I've always tried to, like I said, keep those weekends open for as long as we possibly can, so they can be kind of a reset for not only coaches, but for athletes too. So.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Coach. Good luck to your football team the rest of the way, and I'm sure we'll run into you at some point down the line during this sports season. Thanks for joining us, Coach, and good luck the rest of the way.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Thanks for putting on this program. This is awesome.
Yep, absolutely. That's head coach Mark Siegert of the Potosi Cassville football team, also the athletic director for Potosi High School. We'll have more on the high school sports roundup after this on YouTube and SoundCloud.
Check out Sups.com. Sups is Southwest Wisconsin's go-to supplement store. Find all your favorite supplement brands at the best prices from local people. Fuel your fitness journey. Sups.com, your go-to supplement store with locations in Fenimore and Dubuque.
This week's highlight reel is presented by Sups.com.
Manhattan Udelhoven for Potosi, and Highland gets the first serve, and we're off and running on 97.7 Country WGLR. Here is Mishik, sent by Halverson, spike down the middle, and a kill. First of the match for Anna Hennessy. And it's 1-0 Highland, and Mishik will now serve for Highland. And a line drive serve dug up by Udelhoven at the high bump. Sent over by the Chieftains. Halverson the set, spiked by Terrell. That's one hand, that was blocked. And then the one-hand bump. And back it will go to Potosi. Checking in to serve now will be Sydney Raker for the Chieftains. Just did clear the net, diving bump. Bump set, sent over by Miller. Now Potosi with a tip at the net, and that's somebody hit the net, and that's it. Final score in set number 1. Highland 25, Potosi 20, and Siegert now to serve for the Chieftains. Dug out far back, upset, right side send over, and then sent back over by the Chieftains. Mishik. Halverson the set, left side spike, tipped at the net. Chieftains handle that, a bump set, and then sent over by Cassie Cooley. Now a left side spike for Highland, and a swing and a miss and a bump attempt. That makes it 13-5 Highland in set number 2. Set point for the Cardinals. In contrast to the first set, this has been a very fast set. Of course, the big delay for whatever reason it was, had to be at least 10 minutes, was what delayed the first set run log. Here's the left side spike. Cassie Cooley blocked at the net, hitting the block field with Caitlin Terrell. And the Cardinals now lead 2 sets to none, 25-20, 25-24-17. And Terrell to serve. And she sends it into the middle, and a miss it ends the match. Highland wins 3 sets to 1, 25-20, 25-8, 23-25, 25-17.
Second and 3, 9:58 to go. First quarter, first drive for the Panthers. Seffel under center. Gives on the end around to Schmitz. Schmitz makes a couple tacklers miss, gets inside the 10, finds the end zone for a touchdown. A Northland Buildings touchdown for number 1, Ashton Schmitz. 6-0. Iowa Grant on top of basketball. 9:45 to go, first quarter. One receiver to each side. Seffel just going to take the snap, push his way in, and he is in for a Northland Buildings touchdown. Whitaker awaits the snap. It's a high snap, but a quick throw over the right side. Open receiver. It is caught, and that is a Northland Buildings touchdown to Cameron Luce. Cameron Luce with his second receiving touchdown of the season. The Bulldogs are on the board, 16-6 with 3:22 to go in the first quarter. And the tight end to the right side of the formation as it's Hinderman still at quarterback, and an inside give to Reed, and he bulldozes his way in for a Northland Buildings touchdown. 2 receivers to the left, one to the right, tight end just off the left side of the formation. Stuart Trung going in motion from left to right. Whitaker takes a snap, inside give to Breyer, and he shakes off a couple tacklers. Now breaks free across the 50 to the 40 to the 30, the 20. Can he get in? He is in. Touchdown, Boscoville. Boscoville goes to the line of scrimmage quickly after a gain of 7 on the previous play. 2 receivers to the left, 1 to the right. Whitaker takes a snap, looking right, scrambles right, looking downfield. Rainbow pass towards the corner. It is caught, but it was inbounds. The official says it's caught. What a catch!
What a throw! He's going to go toward number 9.
Cameron Luce, 6'3", 165. He's got the hops, that's for sure. 4th and 5. Again, they can get a first down if they need it. Whitaker, quick pass over the middle, looking for Luce. It is caught, and he is in for a Northland Buildings touchdown. Luce is matched up one-on-one on the outside, but they're going to give inside to Briar Lane, and he finds his way into the end zone. Touchdown, Boscoville. Line of scrimmage, 4th and 1. And Steffels going to keep it. He bounces his way forward, gets inside the 20 to the 10, angles toward the pylon. He is in for an Iowa Grant touchdown.
Grow your business by enhancing your digital marketing efforts with Queen Bee Radio and Phase 3 Digital. We provide customized solutions based on your business's unique needs, including targeted advertising, website development, and search engine optimization. Contact us at 608-349-2000 or visit p3da.com/Platteville to learn more.
Back on the Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundup, it's now time for us to preview Week 4. I'm now joined again by Scott Tolzman, Steve Prestegard, and Josh Wiederholt. And boy, do we have 3 awesome games on Queen Bee Radio coming up on Friday night. And I think the game of the week, Steve and Josh, you'll have the call of Platteville taking on Broadhead Judah, battle for first place in the SWC. Steve, you had mentioned in the previous segment, Broadhead Judah probably the favorite of the conference, but Platteville, one of those teams probably projected middle of the road, but are playing better and might be exceeding expectations a bit. I expect this to be an outstanding battle, but what do you make of that matchup heading into Week 4?
Well, the truth of it is that Broadhead Judah, one reason that they're as good as they are is they're difficult to play. Time was when probably 3/4 or more of football teams played the wing T. Well, now you can mention the teams who play the wing T easier than the teams that don't, because that second group is much larger now. So that's one of the challenges of playing the wing T. And Scott can probably attest more to this. About when you play a team that plays a style that nobody else on your schedule does. That requires you to take more practice time up to practice against that. And then, of course, the wing T there's a reason that the wing T was as used as it was over the decades until relatively recently, when everybody seems to be running the spread now.
Yeah, it's kind of like Lancaster, their old option, If you don't play anybody else that runs the option, and all of a sudden you're playing a team, that it does take a lot of preparation away. And assignments wise, you're dealing with 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. And, those kids sometimes forget assignments, and it can make it difficult. And the wing T is misdirections, and if you're not paying attention, it can create a problem. And, as well as Platteville played the other night, you two are going to see a pretty good game there.
One thing about Broadhead Judah, at this point, I think they're the best team in the area, but I'm not sure they've been tested yet. And I think they're going to get that test on on Friday, you look at their scores, and they haven't apparently had too much difficulty beating the three teams they beat. They beat Evansville, which is a bigger school at least, I think. But I think Brad Judah might be as curious as everybody else is as to playing one of the better teams around, which I think Platteville definitely is. What that's going to mean. Platteville's advantage over the past few seasons is they're a deeper team this year. One thing that's going to really help, I would have to think, Friday, is they actually have two different sets of defensive linemen, and they rotate them in and out. Line play, obviously, is incredibly crucial for high school. The other thing that they're deeper in is guys that can handle the ball on offense. They're actually rotating 6 different receivers and 3 different running backs. And so that is an advantage. It's a long-term advantage, obviously, because, when guys graduate, you have guys replacing them that have played before. And if you have guys who get hurt, well, you got guys that you can plug into their place. But even during a game, I think it makes a difference because they're not the same running back. And I think that, you can change guys and have kind of a change of pace. You have a guy that's more of a power running back versus one that's more of a speed kind of guy. That has to help also. And I think also, and Josh can attest to this, I think Platteville's offensive line hasn't gotten a lot of credit, but they've played quite well so far this season. They have not, I think they've only gotten maybe a couple of holding penalties the whole season that I remember anyway. And they're giving TJ Pink time to throw. And then the added bonus to that is that it's pretty amazing to watch for a kid who had just played his 3rd game as a starter last week, how TJ Pink is able to keep the play going if the protection breaks down, and eventually it always does, but he can run, he can find time to get a receiver open and then, complete the pass. I've been really impressed with that the last couple of weeks for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, moving on to the second game. This is another very juicy matchup. Potosi Cassville at Cuba City. We'll have that game on Super Hits 106, as well as the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. And honestly, when I saw the schedule and I saw that these two were going head to head, these are two teams that I've seen pretty regularly over the last 2 seasons. And, thank you for the Swall Six Rivers crossovers, because this would be the only scenario where these two would go head to head. Josh, you saw Cuba City last week, and feel somewhat similar to what Potosi Cassville ran into last week with Darlington. Coming off a loss, they're trying to get things right. And, I imagine Potosi Cassville is going to have some motivation and a chip on their shoulder heading into Cuba City on Friday night against a very good and very solid Cuba City team.
Yep. And you're right. These crossover games are awesome, but I can't imagine, like we said earlier, Potosi Cassville's too happy with the games that they got scheduled. After playing Darlington last week, who was the only team to get a pass rush against Platteville this year, and then playing Cuba City this week, yeah, it's just tough going. And and it's going to be a great game. We're going to find out a lot about Potosi Cassville and also Cuba City with their seeing how they match up. I mentioned earlier they're kind of a big numbers physical team, and on top of that, quarterback Tyson Richard, when they do throw the ball, which they're looking to run first, very efficient, very accurate, and they're just a good team altogether. And they have the numbers, so they ran kind of like a 3-4 hybrid against Peck Argyle last week, who spread it out. They have the size and numbers to match up with pretty much anyone, and it should be just an amazing game, and it'll be fun to see how they do match up with the Potosi Cassville team, another team that just teams that are steeped in tradition as well, which is really cool to see those two play each other.
Yeah, it feels like one of those rare matchups where like both teams do like to kind of spread the ball out offensively, but the lines are very physical, going head to head. That should be a very fun matchup. Again, Potosi Cassville at Cuba City will be on Super Hits 106 and streaming on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. And then Tom Nisus and I will make the trip to Mauston, where the Flying Arrows will take on Mauston, coming off an emotional win against Prairie du Chien, again last week, where last year Mauston came to Lancaster on a Thursday night game last week, and Lancaster won 35-0. I believe there was a running clock by the time the third quarter came through, if I recall that game correctly. But yeah, I think the key for Lancaster is not do what Prairie du Chien did to them the previous week, where coming off a very emotional win, you have a long road trip over 2 hours to get to Mauston. And Scott, I'll ask you this from a head coaching perspective: when you're coming off a win like that, and then you have to go on a lengthy bus ride for your next game, what are the things that the coaches have to do to kind of make sure that the players, keep their minds right and stay focused and, be ready to play, a potentially intense game the following week?
Enjoy Saturday, enjoy Sunday, but Monday's a new game, and forget about the game before and look at this next game. And at least when I was in Belmont, if we had a trip this long, we probably had got a coach, and then we would watch a football tape, a movie or something, just to keep the kids in their right mind. But it's tough. They're young kids. They want to have that success, but you got to remind them that was last week. This is this week. We got to worry about this week and forget about last week.
I have to think, and I don't have a huge frame of reference for this, but I have to think that the coaches are also more concerned about the trip than the players are. Players get out of school early. If they're on a coach, hey, that's great. They get to watch video of some sort. They're, more comfortable than a school bus. They get to, and again, they get to leave school early. I think the coaches are always the ones who are kind of more concerned about the travel issues, about, keeping to a routine and continuity and all of that. Now, the flip side of that is that bus ride back afterwards, it can be a short trip because you won, and it can be a really long trip because you didn't. So there are, I don't know. They may get the long distance award, at least at this point, except, of course, Tom Nisus, who isn't here, and I can attest how long it takes to get to Arcadia from Platteville for a few years back. But again, that was a successful trip. So, nobody carped about the distance except those who had to drive back in the dark after that.
Yeah, I had the Cuba City at Bondwell season opener last year, which, again, anytime that my parents from the Green Bay area can come see me at a game, I think that, is a bit too far travel distance wise. but yeah, a 2-hour trip, it's, maybe just a shorter school day, and a longer, bus ride. But, like you said, I don't think the trip up, well, at least for us, the trip up is not necessarily the concern. The drive back is probably more of the concern with all the wildlife that we have in Southwest Wisconsin that we might have to dodge on the way back through.
Well, the other thing is the trip up is not a problem as long as you're not going through Madison. So there you go.
Valid point. Yes, I will take that. All right, and then some additional SWAL Six Rivers crossover games, and the one that immediately stands out to me when I look at the schedule: River Ridge at Mineral Point, because I think both of those teams have some serious question marks next to them, where, River Ridge is 3-0. They did shut out their last two opponents, and granted, I haven't seen how River Ridge played last week against Belleville, but if you beat a team 24-0, I would assume that the defense was outstanding and that you assembled some offensive production to keep the momentum going in your favor. But Mineral Point, coming off, their first win against Southwestern East Dubuque last week, a much needed win, I think, for the Pointers. And I think, this is kind of one of those measuring stick type of games to see which team can really find their identity and set the pace for them for the, I hate to say this, but the second half of their season.
Well, the thing that play Lancaster, and they obviously run similar offenses. We've seen Mineral Point beat a team that's very run heavy in Southwestern East Dubuque, but that's not the kind of offense that Lancaster runs. And I think Scott and Josh all pointed out that it's difficult to play an option offense if that's not what you see every week. But now Mineral Point has seen that, and so I have to think that's somewhat of an advantage, certainly for the Pointers. And as far as River Ridge goes, they're 3-0. There's some questions about how good they are at 3-0. They're going to get their answers, I am certain of this, on Friday.
I agree. It's a measuring game to find out how good Ridge is and where Mineral Point stands. So I would say, I'm not sure where the game is. Is it at Mineral Point or at River Ridge?
It's at Point.
I would probably give the game to the home team.
Yeah, and this is one of those interesting scenarios where, again, Mineral Point is facing a Winkers coached offensive attack. So I'm assuming that Coach Leonard he's going to get a feel for what type of attack that River Ridge is going to pose. It's just, does Mineral Point have the firepower to counter that? And then for River Ridge, can that defense stay as sound as they have been? I mean, we've learned how not great offensively Seneca Wazeeka Steuben has been. We know Belleville has not been great on the offensive side of the ball. Just looking at the scores of those games, I think that this is I think a true test probably for the River Ridge defense to see can they play with some tougher competition.
The other thing too is I think the question also is for Mineral Point in the second half, because Mineral Point does, we've said this before, they have one of the smallest rosters they've had in years. Now, as Justin Leonard told us before the game, most everybody's bought in, so that is not an issue. But you can get worn down, especially against physical teams that run the ball a lot in the second half. And stamina might be an issue for Mineral Point in the second half of this game.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but looking at some of the other crossover games, Blackhawk Warren at Fenimore, which, Steve, if you recall, during the spring football season in the pandemic era, that was a time where Fenimore ended the 27-game winning streak that Blackhawk Warren had, and Blackhawk seems to be firing on all cylinders. That'll be a tough matchup for the Golden Eagles. Southwestern East Dubuque. Oh, go ahead.
I will tell you that Fenimore's got a great chance to win if Blackhawk Warren fumbles the ball 6 times, which I believe was the number when those two teams played. I'm going to hazard a guess they're not going to do that this time, but with the option offenses, high gain, high risk, and teams that's the case with any offense, obviously, but teams that put the ball on the ground give the other team an opportunity to stay in the game, including a team that, at least on paper, might be an inferior team. Everybody knows that.
Yep, and again for Blackhawk Warren, this isn't game 1 of their season heading into it. They're very much again firing on all cylinders, and they're looking in solid shape heading into their matchup against Fenimore. Southwestern East Dubuque at Darlington. Intriguing matchup stylistically. I'm sure Darlington just has more than enough firepower to hold Southwestern East Dubuque in check, but I'm not going to count out Southwestern East Dubuque by any stretch. They've as I said during the football preview show, and I think that they showed it through their first 2 games, that they are a scrappy team, and they clawed their way back against Mineral Point before the Pointers put them away last week. That that has sneaky good, potential to it. I think it just kind of depends on, what the game flow looks like and how much the ball bounces in favor of Southwestern East Dubuque too, which, we'll see how that shakes out.
The only thing I'd say about that game also is that I think that'll be the first game that will be done because both teams run the ball a lot, don't throw the ball a lot. So, if they're still there at 8:45, that's maybe the power went out or something like that.
Yep. The other two matchups, Benton Scalesbound Charlesburg at Belleville, and then Pecatonica Argyle at Parkview Albany. The two programs that I get mixed up because the P's co-op with the A's, and one of those teams will get their first win of the season. Let's talk about the Ridge and Valley Conference now. Highland at Boscobel, that's got a sneaky good matchup to it. The game is played at Boscobel, and mind you that all of Boscobel games to this point have been played on their home field. All four of their first games are played at home. They welcome in Highland, coming off the win against Seneca Wazeeka Steuben, shutting them out, as we said earlier. And like I said, I think Boscobel is just a really fun team to watch, just the way that they played against Iowa Grant. And, I think Boscobel, granted the final score, I don't think it was really a true indicator of how competitive that game was. It would not surprise me if this game, is very close and it comes down to one possession. And I would, go so far as saying it wouldn't surprise me if Boscobel knocks off Highland in this matchup, because, Highland has not, really shown, their dominance, much like some of the other Ridge and Valley teams.
Well, they have a new coach, head coach, Highland does. And I don't think they've changed a whole lot. But there's always sort of a transition there because, every head coach has different priorities, different ways of doing things, that sort of thing. The other thing is that Highland did have a fair number of seniors graduate. The other great storyline about this game is really any time that Highland plays, because, and this will end after this season, obviously, but Highland has been for years either the smallest or next to smallest school in the entire state to play 11-man football, not co-oping with anybody, but just by themselves. So there's one storyline there. Then, of course, there's Boscobel, who has not been successful for a long time. They, this season, have had a couple instances where they look like they're on the cusp. And, I have to think that everybody in Boscobel is waiting for them to finally find that game where they have the chance to, to break through. Maybe it's Friday. And, that's the case. Nobody's out of the conference race with one loss,
Right.
Necessarily. So it is going to be a very interesting game in Boscobel. I hope the grass, if they're playing all these home games, I hope the grass doesn't wear out.
Yeah, no kidding. Yep, the other matchups in the Ridge and Valley, Iowa Grant is at Hillsboro, and Seneca Wazeeka Steuben at Ithaca. Again, Ithaca, we talked about earlier, kind of the consensus pick to win the conference, hosting the reigning conference champions in the Ridge and Valley. Kind of curious to see what the outcome of that game looks like. So with all the matchups that we've talked about, all the storylines that we've discussed, what are the things that you guys are looking for in week 4? What kind of stands out to you as far as storylines and things to kind of look for as we head into this 4th week of the season?
Well, like we were kind of talking about earlier. Well, first of all, rolling the ears. battle for the bridge against Dubuque Saturday. But
nice.
No, it's been just a wild season, like we were talking about. Anytime we think that someone looks really, really good and is going to run away with it, they get knocked off. And that's what makes the games great to cover, fun to cover, because we have a general idea of what could happen, but you get crazy outcomes like Lancaster Prairie du Chien.
Right.
Well, this starts a huge 3-week stretch for Platteville. They've looked good in the second and third games of the season, haven't given up a point since their first game against Darlington. But now it gets serious because they're playing Broadhead Judah this week. They go to Prairie du Chien for what turned I guess, twilight start. And then they get Lancaster the week after that, and what will be the last Platteville home game at Ralph E. Davis Pioneer Stadium. So, people looked at Lancaster, at Platteville as kind of a dark horse in the SWC, other than West Sports, that is. But you're going to get an answer in the next 3 weeks for real as to, is Platteville maybe a title contender, a dark horse title contender, or, are they going to struggle to make in the playoffs, or are they going to do better than that? This is what, and it starts Friday as far as the home and go with the team that, at least as of now, is probably the odds-on favorite in the SWC. And I would think probably at this point the best team in Southwest Wisconsin now.
Yep, Scott?
I guess I would say we're going to find out who are your better teams, and are they going to rise up to the occasion to keep going up. I made that comment before with the milk, the milk and cream, they separate themselves, which ones are going to go up and which ones are going to go backwards. And, between this week and next week, you're going to begin seeing your better teams make that bigger distance with your lesser teams.
Yeah, and the things that I'm looking at are, which teams, find their identities. Like I was mentioning with the River Ridge at Mineral Point matchup, I think a lot of questions are going to be answered about, what type of team each of them are. To a degree, Fenimore as well. You start out the season 2-0, you lose by 16 to Benton Scales Mount Shalsburg. How do you respond, on your home field against a team like Blackhawk Warren? The Ridge and Valley, who's gonna stand out, in that conference, and more specifically for the game that I'll have Lancaster at Mauston. Can Lancaster keep that momentum going after a very big emotional win against Prairie du Chien, and kind of stay in that race for the top of the conference? And like Steve mentioned, it's Platteville's going to be seeing them in a little bit, and I know that Lancaster ends the season with Broadhead Judah, which it may come down to those two to decide the conference, depending on how these middle games pan out. So before we officially close up, Steve Prestigard, you unveiled to us your high five. Let's run those down. Let's have a little debate. We'll embrace debate for a little bit on this week 4 show. Let's run down your high five, the 5 teams that you believe are the best in Southwest Wisconsin.
Well, I hope I remember them. Number 1, I think, is Broadhead Judah. They have met expectations to this point. They were supposed to be good. So far they are. But obviously they'll get more of a test after this. Lancaster is obviously number 2 because they have exceeded expectations to this point. It's kind of hard to understate how big their win over Prairie du Chien was, because I had them last week, Prairie du Chien, at number 2. Well, not anymore, they're not. Blackhawk Warren has pretty much steamrolled their way through the schedule. I have them at 3rd. Darlington, despite losing, is still a tremendous team, and I have them at 4th. And River Ridge is, undefeated yet. Until somebody knocks them off, they're probably, worthy of number 5. So that's my picks, and I change all next week. But I do think that it's kind of amazing to think that here we are. We've covered 4 conferences. We've been through 3 weeks of the football season, and there are only 4 undefeated teams left after 3 weeks.
Yeah, there's been some tough competition, and I salute you for rattling off your list off memory. I did pull it up just to verify that your top 5 was as accurate as you said it was. I am kind of interested to know what your criteria is for the for the top 5. But yeah, looking at at the list here, I mean, when you look at the records and stuff like that, I definitely think that those are like, if those teams were all to match up head to head, I do think that that's kind of that pecking order, at least for now. But yeah, I do think if I were to debate as far as the placement, I do think that Darlington is probably better than Blackhawk Warren, at least at this point. But and I'm still kind of curious about Lancaster. I mean, they did have 2 very gritty wins. Their first 2 weeks, in addition to the physical win against Prairie du Chien last week. It feels like that. I think the term that I used last week was a rock fight. That every game that Lancaster in feels like a rock fight, and if they have to drag a team down with them, so be it. But yeah, if that's what it takes to win, that's what works. By all means, go with it.
Right.
Well, I tend to think the hallmark of really good teams is a team that is able to win a game regardless of what kind of style of game it is. So if you have kind of a slugfest, they can win that kind of game. If it's a more wide open game, they can win that kind of game. There's a lot of teams that if they can play their kind of football game, they have a good chance of winning. But if they do something, if they're in a game that's not like that, then they really have no shot. And I know this is a sore subject locally, but you could look at Wisconsin for the last however many years. And play good defense, they beat about anybody, including in the Rose Bowl. But if they fell behind, they were in trouble. And if they came up against a team that threw the ball a lot and they couldn't get a pass rush going, they were in trouble. To me, the best kinds of teams are the teams that it doesn't matter what kind of game it is, they're going to do what it takes and succeed at whatever it takes to win. So those teams that remain undefeated, I guess we'll see if they made that test or not.
Yeah, but I find it interesting that the number 1 team, Broadhead Judah, probably has arguably the toughest game of all the ones listed in your top 5, with them going to Platteville, which again should be an outstanding football game. So kind of curious to see how how your high 5 changes heading into next week, because like I said earlier, the more we learn, the less we know.
I'll be very interested to see how it changes too. I may change the criteria next week. Who knows?
There's nothing official to it. There's no real science to it. It's just whatever Steve is feeling, at that particular moment. I mean, it might have, had you done it earlier in the afternoon, it might be completely different, because who knows, right?
I appreciate that you have the fortitude to actually give a ranking, because I won't even critique it.
Look,
I'm not going to touch that.
I have a job where I put my opinion in the paper every week, and I've done that for 11 years. So you think I have a problem going out on a limb? Read the Platteville Journal.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks a lot, guys, for being on the show tonight. It should be a very fun week 4. We're looking forward to recapping week 4 and previewing week 5, where, hey, we were just saying that the season's a third of the way done. We'll be almost halfway done, in a couple weeks before we know it. Scott Tolzman, Steve Pressegard, Josh Wiederholt, thanks for joining us on the High School Sports Roundup. We'll see you guys for a new episode next Thursday.